I haven't had a chance to talk with the panelists yet, so this is just sausage being made right here. So guys, you've spent quite a bit of time talking about and thinking about the Pro AV market, but I wanted to share with our audience as a way to kick off this panel some of my observations about attending ISE in Barcelona and just as a little more of a discussion about this Pro AV marketplace, because I think that'll help frame some of the discussion later. Are you guys okay with that? Okay. All right, terrific. So then if we could, let's go ahead and put this presentation up on the screen. So coming from the broadcast market space, my introduction to Pro AV was, like I said, having people walk into our offices and say, hey, we're going to shoot this new production all on SLR cameras. You know, I remember that was fairly dramatic introduction to Pro AV. But actually, we had been dealing with Pro AV equipment, and Rick back there had really been helping a lot with that for many years. And Pro AV equipment, whether it was analog cameras that somebody used, or maybe Pro AV audio type products where they weren't spending the same amount of money that we were spending on the professional products, those have been part of what broadcasters have had in their facility for years. And the interfaces that we dealt with, as Sam said early on, were easy to deal with. Analog audio, NTSC or PAL video coming out of the devices, and then the SDI and you know, the AES audio still coming out of these Pro AV products. It was no big deal, right? And so what that meant is I could be very lazy about learning about the Pro AV market, and I think about the only other experience beyond the professional market coming into our broadcast facility that I had is years ago I used to maintain audio, video, and smoke systems in a company that did aerial laser combat. Real airplanes chasing each other around in the sky. And in there, I put a switcher in, and I put multiple Pro AV cameras in the thing, little lipstick cameras from Panasonic. And it was a lot of fun, you know, but I didn't have to really learn about Pro AV as any of that. So this really was, this show in Barcelona at the end of January really was my first experience beyond talking to these guys about what Pro AV really is. And I think for those in the audience here who have just been involved in the broadcast industry, this may be an interesting presentation. So ISE says it's the world's leading business-to-business event for the AV and systems integration business, and I have no reason to doubt that. It's a big show. We'll talk about that in a minute. And their exhibitors present solutions for numerous vertical sectors. I think if I was writing this, I would italicize and bold numerous vertical sectors. Our visitors are AV and IT professionals and users of AV systems. A lot of IT professionals end up being the people who own these systems, install them, operate them, recommend them. So in a lot of places where we would be used to either having our own people do this or SI, system integrators, doing it, you see an awful lot of IT people at these shows, and that was interesting. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So the market sectors as identified by ISE are corporate, not unexpected, education, also not unexpected, live events and venues. Yeah, like we're talking about big venues here. We're talking about coliseums. We're talking about Wembley. We're talking about big venues, and that was a surprise to me. I didn't realize that. Hospitality, I got the impression that they mentioned hospitality as kind of an aspirational thing, but I don't know that that's really a huge part of it. Retail, I was surprised at how much retail is in this market space. A lot. Residential, we'll get to that in a minute. And IT and networking. And interesting, under IT and networking, I keep coming back to that because it wasn't what I thought. It's how to deliver better employee experiences throughout the building. Not what we typically think of when we think of IT and networking, primarily because we require almost enterprise-type switches, enterprise-type knowledge around switches and network fabrics to get our stuff to work. And there was very little of that at this show. In fact, I didn't see a single enterprise switch. Maybe they were there, but I didn't see a single one there. ISE has technology zones, which we typically call halls. Audio occupied 2 halls, and we're talking about a hall like the South Hall at NAB, or we're talking about Hall 8 at IBC. These are big halls, and there are 8 of them. Content production and distribution, digital signage and DOE. I'm probably not saying that right. Yeah, digital out of home. Never heard of it, so that was instructive. Multi-technology, that occupied 3 halls, and if I would say any one of these was kind of us, that would be it. Why it's called multi-technology, maybe one of our panelists can tell us. I have no clue. Residential and smart building. Interesting that this is part of Pro AV. I don't get it, but okay. And something called unified communications. I went and stopped and asked at least 3 vendors that were in the unified communication space what it was that they did. Maybe, again, our panelists can comment on that. I'll tell you what they told me. And education, which again is there. ISE by the numbers. It's a pretty big show. Bigger than IBC, a little bit smaller than NAB. There were about 74,000 attendees. In terms of countries, it beats the pants off of NAB, of course. 160 countries, 1,400 vendors. So I don't know how many vendors there are at an NAB. I'm not sure. But that's probably more vendors than at NAB, I suspect. And it's, like I keep saying, it's big. 82,000 square meters, 880, almost 900,000 square feet in the 8 halls that we talked about. To me, this was instructive. So if you ask, well, who sponsors this show? The short story is a bunch of companies I don't know anything about. But they're big enough that they actually sponsor the biggest Pro AV show in the world. Avixa and CETA both do certification. Avixa certifies products, CETA certifies people. And Andy, I don't know that you had mentioned this yet, and we may talk about this in the panel, but certifying people, it seems to be a really big part of the Pro AV marketplace. And evidently, if you want to be a system integrator in Pro AV, you got to have your people certified. And so maybe people get IPMX certified. Maybe we can poke around on that when we get to talking about that. KNX is, somebody help me out, what business is KNX in?
KNX makes connection points for things like blinds that you automatically bring up and down.
That's right.
All of the mechanical devices you can find in a facility, and these types of things get integrated into things like Crestron processors and QSYS processors and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's under that unified communications, maybe, or?
It's not. It's multi-technology. It's part of the Pro AV control. But in the context of KNX, they do things in many different industries, not only Pro AV, and they have hundreds of thousands of products that are covered. But it's programmable machines, if you want to think of it that way.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, and then I just looked at the top 3 tiers of sponsors for the show. Platinum, Crestron, of course. Humley, don't know them. Lang, don't know them. Shure, first a company that we know, right? Shure, the audio microphone company. Man, they had a big booth. Holy smokes, much bigger than anything you've seen at NAB or IBC, which I thought was interesting. You go through the gold sponsors, no AV manufacturers that we know there. Dell, Jabra, Zoom, and you get to the silver sponsors, and now we're back to Matrox, a vendor that we know in our space, Google, and some company called Kinderman that, again, I don't know. What do they do? Sam, do you know?
I don't know Kinderman. Maybe they're consulting.
Okay.
Lang is a big integrator.
Okay, Lang's a big integrator. Okay, so I thought this was interesting, just that the mix and the kind of the power in the market in terms of the vendors. There's right at the top in certification. That tells you this is a different industry, right? So I looked at ISE and I looked at our market and I tried to understand, well, what's either different or unexpected or missing? And a lot of interesting things popped out here. Post-production, basically non-existent. Almost not there. Maybe it's there in a little bit, but I think at this point, a lot of post-production is done on desktop products. No Avids, no giant post vendors that I saw there, and the same thing with CGI and effects. Much less emphasis on that. No radio, not a surprise. Enterprise IT infrastructure, missing, as far as I could tell. IT was there, but they were much more in the COVID, let's work together space, not at all emphasizing fabric or whatnot, as far as I could tell. Studio lighting, much less emphasis. Transmitters and towers, as you would expect, missing. Gaming production. I thought this was very interesting. You're starting to see at NAB and IBC gaming production and whole areas that are devoted to that. As far as I know, that's not there at least it wasn't in an ISE that I saw. Military, not there. Security, not there. Now, that's not to say that there weren't security cameras, there weren't PTZ cameras around or whatever, but in terms of kind of that being an emphasis of the show or whatever, nope. Those guys, as I believe, have their own shows, big shows. Same with medical, not there specifically. So
maybe I could nuance a little bit.
Yeah, would you please? Because this is my first view of this thing. So.
There's an awful lot of special effects in Pro AV. So when you look at CGI and effects, it may wear different names, but at ISE there's a great deal of special effects and virtual production and things like that. This was all over the LED wall space. Everyone was talking about the amazing things that you could do with LED walls with special effects.
With the virtual sets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Absolutely. I did see that in a number of places. You're absolutely correct. I guess I meant the big vendors that we see doing special effects in our space. I didn't see those names. Maybe that's
they were all
specifically
there.
what I was
VIZRT,
looking
for example, was powering like 100 booths. So they're there. It's just that they're a part of a bigger system, and you don't necessarily recognize it.
Okay. Absolutely. Fair enough.
I just asked Ross. There's some people from Ross in this crowd. Like Ross was probably in 200 booths.
Yeah, they were there. I saw Ross was there. All right, added or different? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
There's more. So enterprise IT infrastructure there in the Unified Communications Hall is where you had all of that. So this is basically the hookups to Zoom and Teams and all of this stuff.
Exactly.
So obviously, you could make a Zoom call from yourself to a colleague. That's one thing. But the Pro AV, where it touches that, is when you're doing something a little bit more sophisticated with a Zoom room. And so there's people that are remote and they're using just their laptop and they're participating in it one way, but the Zoom room is configured with speakers and microphones and screens and things that are wired up in an AV mindset. So there was a lot of that actually at the show. Instead of studio lighting, you have a lot of event lighting, and there was a huge amount of that.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. You're exactly right.
And for gaming production, there were many booths that were talking about the AV part of those gamer events. So game production, the way the NEB crowd sees it, is getting it to air.
Yeah, or producing it. It's
right.
On the production side. That's right.
The AV side is trying to get really low latency AV ingredients in those gamer halls. Like for example, all of the KVM companies were, they were showing some aspect of, gaming events. Okay. Military and security is a similar thing. One of the things that's actually back on the rise, for a while, KVM was starting to fade because you could accomplish the same effect of split computing, having the compute power in one place and the user tools like monitors, keyboard, mouse, and speakers away from the compute. You could achieve that through virtual desktop infrastructure, application virtualization, and different sort of enterprise solutions. But because of cybersecurity, because of different things happening in the market, there's a huge resurgence of classical KVM mindset of having the compute air-gapped from the user space. So being able to remote, over IP, the keyboard, the mouse, the video, et cetera, on a different network using a different type of networking than the way that the Dell computer or the HP computer that you're extending is networked. So a pure air gapping of those systems for security purposes and things like that. So there was a lot of military and security. And then medical was also very, very big at ISC. So the biggest market, in case some of you don't know, for SDVOE is medical. It's something like 40% of all SDVOE sales. And it's because of the very, very low latency achievable by SDVOE. So that's actually the #1 segment for that technology. I think that these findings were interesting, and maybe it tells us something about we're a lot closer to the AV industry than we sometimes think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting hearing you talk. It's like, admittedly, what I said at the beginning, I don't know this industry. And so this is, quite a bit of this is just me walking around the show. And so certainly you can walk around a show and walk past stuff and not know what you're looking at too, right? So I think I suffered from some of that. But anyhow, my observations, for what they're worth. So what was added or different? There's an awful lot of home and office automation, and that also, I think, ties into things like the shade controllers and the room controllers and all of that. I had no idea that that was part of it. I guess if I had thought about the AV controllers that you see sitting in the back of a conference room and the ties in that has to different machinery in the room, I would have made that connection. But there was a whole part of a hall devoted to home automation, so at this show. So by extension, I guess they're moving into those areas.
I love that automation discussion point because it's one of the things that is so entrenching for some of the big players in Pro AV. When you think about where we're coming from, our professional production equipment, how did it used to get erected? So there would be some major broadcasters and some major studios that were foretelling of their projects, their event, the Olympics, whatever. And so whatever capacity was being added, multiple vendors competed for that business. And after you built something for the Olympics or after you built something for the World Cup, the sales team at those companies got tapped and said, where else can we sell this stuff?
Of course.
So a lot of that ended up in businesses. Corporate guys got, pushed studio equipment and government entities and schools and lots of different organizations got pushed this professional equipment. And it was used exactly the same way as it was used in broadcast and film and the NAB industries. But it was also connected to AV signal management and routing managed by companies like Crestron, AMX, Extron, and guys like that. The power of those companies is substantial because it's years and years and years and years of iterating drivers and user interfaces so that people can control many aspects of their huddle rooms, their conference rooms, their event spaces, and it's very, very difficult to separate that influence from the users. They depend on that stuff all the time. Crestron's smartest innovation in the last 20 years was the little touch panel that sits on the desk of every conference room and lets you do whatever you want, control whatever you program into it. It was brilliant for a variety of reasons. The brand that you see etched into your mind every single day is Crestron. And from the services industry point of view, you gave a huge boon of services business to the services industry to create those personalized workspace experiences for those users. So every single user in the AV industry has, some equipment that is tailored to their site, to their rooms, to their needs, and this services accompaniment to the equipment is a very big part of the overall equation. So when you read what's on Brad's slide here about home and office automation and workspace collaboration and things like this, factor in that the years of experience of these AV companies creating these personalization experiences, they got pretty good at packaging that into things that could be used by other markets, including the home market. There's now a lot of people that have pretty good home entertainment systems, and there's a lot of devices that allow you to control lighting and some mechanical things like blinds or things like that. And certainly your audio and video equipment in your home can be controlled by the same types of products. So in the home you have a lot of different price points and ease of use options, just like in the professional space. You have things that you could assemble yourself with Philips equipment and Lutron and things like that. But for people with more means, their home AV systems could be a lot more sophisticated, and they could actually put in real Crestron systems or real AMX systems. And it turns out that the residential business is something like 8 to 10% of some of those companies' revenues now. So this is a big area for them.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, this maybe we kind of go shooting off into space here, but sometimes that happens in these panels. But these guys have heard me talk about this before. There's an open source home automation project called OpenHab that specifically exists to try to deal with the fact that when you buy the Philips bulbs and you buy these shades and you buy this thing and you buy that and this thermostat, all of them want you to load an app on your phone so that you go and you control the shades with this app and you control the Philips light bulbs with this app and so on. And OpenHab's success has been to just go out and write drivers for all that stuff and present one open interface and an open source solution on your phone, rather than you having to basically have all these different companies competing to be king of the universe in terms of the control space in the home. So it's an interesting dynamic in that space.
But the reason it's worth bringing it up and reflecting on it for a moment is once you get it easy enough and cheap enough to be in the home, I mean, these things influence each other both ways. So just like your NAB crowd, after doing the Olympics and the World Cup, sent people out to do, whatever hookups you could with this professional equipment in enterprise, in government, in medical, in whatever, okay? The same thing happened with the AV equipment. So whatever they were selling to the professional space that they then migrated to the home, now that there's this really, cost-effective, easy-to-use home stuff, this has an influence backwards on the AV equipment, and it puts tremendous, options in the hands of users, lots of granularity. You can go from something very, very easy and very, very cheap all the way to something extremely professional and purpose-built, so, and everything in between, right?
Yeah, very true. So anyway, you already said, and I had wanted to make this point, that these, under the added and different, the first 3 points kind of all go together. The home and office automation in terms of individual things that can be manipulated was one space. The workplace collaboration and facility management was a really interesting thing. I pulled up to one vendor and asked them about what they were doing, and they were having software products that were dealing with the fact that most companies don't have enough physical space for all of their employees to come to work at the same time anymore, and that's just going to get worse. And so not only are they flexing the office space and making sure that if engineering and marketing come in at the same time, that they're there's enough space for everybody, and that people that need to typically talk to each other are allocated cubicles or workspaces that are co-adjacent. They were talking about even down to assigned parking spaces. Now this is, seems nuts, but it was a company in Europe. Parking is very, very difficult to come by, and empty parking spaces are, a problem, and they were even dealing with that kind of stuff. So just very fine-grained facility management and an awful lot of Zoom and, Google Meet and this and that. All of those kind of workspace things were on display there. Different concert venues. Big venues, like I said, audio, lighting, you were talking about, Sam, effects. There was an entire hall that was dedicated to concert-type effects and lasers and bubble machines and smoke machines and this and that. All of that was there, which I didn't expect. And displays. Interestingly, I would have thought our industry would have had the shows that had the displays. Nah, The displays that were at this show, there were much larger displays. There were many more displays. There were outdoor displays, different kinds, like outdoor displays, and the quality of them was astounding. And so the amount of effort and vendors that are participating in the display space at this show was really unexpected, really a shock to me. Content management, they had content management, but it has a different focus than what we think about with content management. When I think about content management, I think about managing 37 different versions of Gone with the Wind, the movie, right? That's not the business, and that's the same thing going on over the hill over here, is controlling all the different versions of Oppenheimer that were created as part of that workflow process and distribution. For these guys, content management a lot of times came down to, imagine a clothing store that has 1,000 outlets across the United States, and they have 30 displays in every store. And are they going to send somebody around with a USB stick to load the new latest clothing lines or whatever into all of these displays that are in all these retail places? Absolutely not. Of course not. And so the retail side of the business doesn't involve just the displays here. It also involves an awful lot about managing the content, rotating that content out, and so on. And I hadn't anticipated that at all. Also, they had quite a big presence of drones, but this was about how you do shows with drones, not using drones to fly cameras, which is pretty much the only way we think of drones.
Before we leave that slide, there's just on the content management, there's also, multiple different sub areas of content management. Just video management systems has different subgroups. There's security video management systems, if you think of things like Indigo Vision and, that type of security, monitoring many security cameras, access control and security cameras, physical security. But video management systems means something entirely different in a different part of the Pro AV space, like Kaltura and Panopto and this type of private searchable video library type of thing. It's an entirely different type of content management or video management system. So there's all of these sub-granularities as well. And all of them at shows like ISE talk about how those type of enterprise class products and services can connect to the AV signal management part of organizations. It's a very critical intersection. Nobody thought about it when it was just HDMI talking to HDMI or professional equipment being hooked up to, PCs or whatever. But now that everything is moving to AV over IP, lots of things have broken. People have to go back to HDMI. It's the only way to connect this to that. It's an interesting problem.
Yeah, and something else that's a little bit creepy about content management that I saw demonstrated at the show is if you're in a public space, you're on a camera. And part of that content management actually reminded me of the time that I was talking to the guys at CNN when the CNN websites were really starting to take off. And I walked through and I saw the facility, and we were doing everything in-house at that time. And there's racks of storage. And I said, wow, man, I know how much content you guys have. And like, you replay the news every 30 minutes. It's like, how much content storage do you need? And they said, that's all customer data. That has nothing to do, all this storage has nothing to do with what we're sending out. It's what we're collecting back. And so the content management, I'll show you a picture of that in a minute, but it goes in a number of different ways. So I know this is an eye chart, but this just gives you an idea of the hall layout. And I just loved the fact, I thought it was just terrific, that the audio guys called their buildings 8.0 and 8.1. You know, they love their decimals in audio. So you had hall 8.0 and 8.1. So, sorry, inside audio joke. So here's an example of the retail space displays that I was talking about. These are just beautiful, beautiful, very large displays. And it's also an example of what I was talking about the cameras watching you. So not at this booth, but at another booth, I saw a display which was showing this kind of display, and it was doing analysis of you as you were standing looking at this display. And it said, middle-aged male. It said dwell time 37 seconds. It said emotion, interested, etc., right? So this is a two-way device, folks. so that was interesting.
When I passed in front of it, it said lack self-discipline.
Yeah. This just showed one of these companies that was, I don't know if this is unified communications either, Sam, so maybe you can set me straight on this, but this was access control, security cameras, intercom, fire panel, blah, 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 all this stuff in buildings was also there being talked about. And this was one company that was using an open way to tie all of that stuff together. Have I got that right, or is that wrong?
Yeah.
Ha! All right, I got one right. Hallelujah. And then as Sam was talking about, a lot of, and this is wrong, I guess, this isn't unified communications, right? But this was all the collaborative stuff like Zoom and Google Meet and et cetera.
Oh, it's definitely what they call unified
It
communications.
is, okay. So all of this stuff from fire panels and access controls to Zoom and whatnot is all unified communications. I guess by definition, unified communications would be everything. This is, okay, so I did include this slide. This is actually the slide where a vendor, who shall be named because they were showing it publicly, displayed a display looking at you, and I don't think you can see it, but there's a little hexagon right here and another little hexagon right here, and next to these hexagons are little tags. These are the tags that say, middle-aged male, whatever, dwell time, blah, blah, blah. So I'm sure nothing as bad is going to happen with any of this. Something else that was interesting to me, in addition to, actually this introduces an interesting topic. So there was a very wide range of booth spending or whatever, kind of all sprinkled throughout the show. So this Iconex, I guess, was an Italian home automation company. Man, they had a beautiful booth. Holy cow. All it needed was a great espresso machine in there. But these, paintings on this display and so on, and then right next to it was just a company selling monitors. Now, maybe a very big company, but they're just out there selling monitors, right? But you did have just little companies and other companies that had very big presence or very elaborate presence. And also you had companies that were selling, I asked a display company, do you think that a single restaurant that has 4 menu boards in it is your customer? They said, absolutely. And I said, what about the Manchester United Stadium where there are 15,000 displays. And they said, absolutely, that's our customer too. And so one of the things that's interesting about this market is just the size of this thing, from small vendors to very large vendors, small quantities to very large quantities. It's really something. Something else that stuck out to me, this is actually the only thing where I looked at a booth and I said, broadcast equipment for sure. Here's a Fujinon telephoto lens on a camera. Everything else was like, yeah, okay, those are some broadcast vendors that are here at the show. But that was the only thing I saw in the whole show where I said, wow. And of course, there were a lot of people taking pictures of, somebody that was a mile and a half away in the hall. But anyhow, I think, why don't we stop there? But I think that, oh no, I did actually, hang on, I did have a takeaway slide. So the takeaways are that this market is related but different. There's very broad marketing, including consumer facing. There's no post-production, but maybe I stand corrected, no medical, whatever, I stand corrected on that. Extremes in customer size. But with all of these things that are different about this market, I thought that it was very video-centric. You had to go a long way around the hall to find vendors that weren't doing video or audio, unless you were in the home automation or the business automation. And clearly this was a market for IPMX, and the applications for IPMX clearly go way beyond what we would typically be thinking of in the broadcast space. So why don't we stop there? And I don't know if you guys have any thoughts or observations now about maybe IPMX and how it relates to serving the broadcast market and the Pro AV market, or anybody want to comment on any of what I said, Jed?
Yeah, I'll just mention, we've been going to that show for quite a while, and 2 years ago it was, what is this IPMX, never heard of it, don't know what you're talking about. Last year it was, okay, I may have heard of it, I'm not really sure why we need it. This year, dramatically different. The vendors that we're talking to are saying, our customers are coming to us asking for this. They love the fact that it's an open standard. They love the fact that they can buy best-of-breed products from multiple vendors and just have them all work. So the message is getting out. There is end-user pull through this market for IPMX. That was very refreshing.
So why do you think that is? What changed?
Well, it's a lot of the work Sam is doing and his group and aims to do the education. What we did in those previous shows and also previous InfoComs is we had presentations, we had people there to talk to end users. We got a lot of end users, educational institutions and corporate, and a lot of live events. People were coming through the Ames booth and just saying, hey, what is this? I've heard about it. It seems kind of interesting. And the messaging that we were able to provide was very well received by them. And I think they went back to their product providers and said, hey, I like what these guys are saying. Where's your product that does this?
That's great.
I'd like to.
Let's take Andy and then Samuel.
Well, I think that I would say that nothing changed. I would say that Sam's efforts and everything are part of what we've been doing, right? So I think that since I think it was right before COVID, 2020 ISC was the first time that IPMX was there. So we're really not very many years in. And I think if anything really changed, it's that now there's actual implemented stuff that's being shown. And they've now seen this 3 times. There's no way we could have gone in 2020 and then signed up all these manufacturers.
No.
It just takes 3 years to build up that effort, and it's a team thing. So
yeah, you got to show up, right? Yeah. Sam?
Yeah, I would love to take some of this credit, but I guarantee you this has nothing to do with the size of budget that Ames can muster or the manpower or anything like that. What really put IPMX on the map in a big way was people experiencing the transition from their former infrastructures that worked, adequately well for what they were doing to new products that implement things that all of a sudden break some connections that they rely on for their day-to-day needs. And people who are deep now with their Dante implementations, their NDI implementations, their SDVOE implementations, their Crestron implementations, their whatever implementations, have faced some real problems. That's criteria number one. Criteria number two, IPMX would be 2 years further behind had it not been for an extreme electronics shortage crisis that hit the entire market. And there were some organizations, very big organizations, enterprise, government, medical, military, that were dependent on siloed AV over IP solutions, and they could not access the brands that they were standardized on, and they could not substitute to something else. They were stuck, okay? The most extreme example, to pick on somebody, is Crestron. That particular company, which was number one as a single vendor volume of AV over IP products, got unlucky, and their supply chain collapsed, and they were offering 24 to 28 month lead times on some of their key products. And people were facing the decision, do I switch to something else that will not be compatible with what I've started investing in, or do I wait it out and delay my project by 2 years? So these were big, painful decisions, massively negative experiences that reflected the problem of siloed proprietary solutions. So Ames has been there to respond with a story that the market was already sort of looking for answers to. So we just happened to have a kiosk at the right time, at the right place, with a story that people say, oh my God, please tell me more, because they're feeling it.
Mark, I was going to just ask you, as you've kind of watched this technical development and the group come together, do you have any observations about this, and also maybe thoughts about one of the things that we said in this panel is that IPMX can work from small systems to large systems, and we've just seen from what I saw in at the ISE show, the orders of magnitude of different size systems there. So I just wanted to come to you and see if you had any thoughts.
Sure, yeah. So one of the things I noticed at ISE was multi-standard support. There were booths, people had products that supported NDI and SDVOE and Dante AV. A lot of smaller companies that I wouldn't expect getting into video. I visited Roland, and they did small production switches which included video. And they were traditionally an audio keyboard company. They were using HDMI. There was definitely interest in moving towards a standard. I think that companies that were using all these standards would very much prefer to have one product in a particular vertical market that solves the problem, rather than having to have 3 different products because they want to support 3 different standards. So, and certainly the vertical reach was dramatic. There was guys doing smart displays, those like smart whiteboards, which had included video. So they had those. They had, like you mentioned, home automation. Crestron had a lot of conference room automation with smart AI, and that was all inclusive. And then you had, like you mentioned, you had events, and they could all use everything from home automation right up to large events can use IPMX, and we talked about all these modes of operation. You can go from fully asynchronous, low latency for gaming, even casual gaming, all the way up to major events production, and they can all use IPMX in different forms. So it has a lot of vertical reach.
Jack, you were at the show. How about you? Did you have some observations you wanted to share with people?
Yes, I was very impressed with the size of the show and all the different companies that, as you talked about, that are different than what we've seen in just traditional business. I think that we had a list of all the companies that were displaying IPMX. I think there were maybe 20 companies that actually had IPMX that was working, and they were able to show it there. I visited, I thought IPMX was mainly this, I got a bar and I'm trying to display things, or a church or something like that. But, one company I went and talked with has got a giant display, as big as this wall, and it's a 64K display. And they want to drive this whole display with IPMX over 100 gig network, right? So it really goes from the very small thing up to this extremely large thing, where we saw all these displays. And there were 3D displays, and there were, it had places where they were showing like a retail store, and instead of having mannequins, they had these really high resolution displays that they would show people with different clothes, and they could change it. So rather than having to go out and physically change things. I even saw that there were 3D versions of mannequins that were there. So they had this spinning video that was running on the end of these little strings or something like that, and it looked like a real person standing there. And they could change whatever they wanted as clothes on that person or whatever. So it is a giant market opportunity, I think, for us to do this IPMX. It's not just this little thing like we have displayed downstairs, but this could be giant for everything for us.
Thank you. Andy, you spent quite a bit of time in the booth, and so I wanted to just ask if you had any thoughts about the conversations you had, and anything that maybe people here would want to know about relative to that.
I would say that, just listening to this conversation here, maybe the one thing I would just maybe emphasize is that that the legacy of, the fact that IPMX is built on SMPTE 2110 and AES 67 is enormously beneficial, because the people, they don't think about video like they thought about it 20 years ago. Literally everybody does video production now. And medium-sized, large companies, they're all producing content. So they're very used to firing up OBS to solve some problem, right? And so when they look at things like SDVOE and even Dante EV, none of those things are really designed with live production in mind. That's not, NDI is the exception to that, and NDI has the opposite problem. They don't have HDCP, they don't support EDID, so they can't be used in that way. So really, I think what people respond to when the conversations I had is the idea that, that IPMX is video on your network. It doesn't matter if it's Pro AV or broadcast. We're just defining how video is done on an IP network. And when they combine the open standards message with that kind of holistic approach, where it's not siloed into one particular use case, or in the case of SDVOE, even maximum of 4K, and it's only on 10 gig. That it lights up for them, and so one thing I mentioned on the show floor, and I won't use the exact language that he used, but I had I was getting interviewed, and the guy we're getting ready, and this is like the 4th interview I've had with him over, the years. And he said to me, "Can I tell you something, Andy, off the record?" And of course, I'm telling you guys now. But he said,
we won't tell him.
Yeah, he said, "Don't F this up." And he, he used the full word. But his point is that, he's seen this before. He knows the industry needs it. Every single press person you talk to, consultant you talk to, customer you talk to, desperately wants IPMX to succeed. And his message, to us was, this looks great. It looks like it's headed on the right track. Keep it there. So I think, there's from the people we need to be excited about it. I think that we're in a good spot. So
that's great. Does anybody have any comments, questions they want to ask the panel at this point? I see a couple of people maybe getting up. Here comes Thomas. Yeah, I think let him go first. First of all, Lee, it's great to have you back. Pulse toward you. Yeah, you're good.
It's good. So Lee Whitcomb, Whitcomb Consulting. The question's mostly for Andrew from the previous presentation. So at SMPTE, well, in AS67, they have a PICS document. And with SMPTE, we're now developing a PICS document for all our standards. Have you guys looked at, for IPMX, developing sort of PICS documents for all the...
Is PICS different than test plan?
It is. It's a protocol implementation
Okay.
component
I can comment
specification.
on that, Lee.
Yep.
Yep, so we're developing what we will call a test plan, which is intended to be similar to a PICS type of thing. We are not necessarily going to call it a PICS name, but starting, as the timeline Andy showed, starting after August, which we plan to have all the documents verified that they match and work with everybody. At that point, we're going to start on this test plan, which would include all the requirements, which is what a PICS does, of what is needed to make it IPMX. And we will then validate that in January of next year, similar to the event that we had, but we're expecting it to be a lot larger, like that we had in Munich. And then that would be at the first time that you would have a label that would match all the requirements, your so-called PICS kinds of things. It would match all the requirements and say, these companies could now have a logo on them, and it will be mainly the companies that are participating at that point. That can then turn into a program that we can have an outside test house possibly run to run all those requirements and say, yes, if you can meet these requirements, you can put a logo on your equipment. And those kinds of things would come out at, say, Infocom type of time frame that you would actually have that formalized plan and so on. So the answer is, we're probably not going to call it PICS, but the plan is to have all the requirements and be able to test those in some way, much like we did with the JT&M tested event. Is that answering your question?
It does. I mean, having the test plan is a good idea, but I would suggest having a separate PICS document is also a good supplement. And the one other thing we sort of learned from doing it for the SMPTE documents, as you go line by line through your specification, as we reread it, we found out, like, this actually isn't testable, and we really should fix the standard. So having the PICS document is a good way to review the standard, because you're going line by line by line, and you'll find that some things you wrote that may not be testable. So I suggest you have both.
Yes, it's a good input, and we're developing something similar. We have to decide whether it's going to be called PICS or something else.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would echo that. In the AMWA, we did a similar exercise around the advanced authoring format way back in the day, and it was insightful, to say the least. So thank you, Lee. Thomas.
Yeah,
Thomas
one more
Edwards.
quick comment on that. We started that process, and I know Lee was chairing that committee for 2110, and I think it's a good direction to head. I know there's a lot of challenges to doing that document, but I think beyond the testing and the interrupt testing, that would really allow equipment to be well qualified against the standard. So I think it's a good direction to head in, but I think it's going to take some time to get there.
Yeah. Thomas, please.
Yeah, Thomas Edwards, Amazon Web Services. You mentioned medical imaging at ISE. I know that DICOM, the digital imaging in communications and medicine, chose 2110-20 uncompressed for their live video. Meanwhile, for their still images, they're actually using high throughput JPEG 2000, and that's actually supported by Amazon Web Services Health Imaging. So that's one reason I know about that. I'm curious if the DICOM folks have had any discussions about IPMX, or if you're aware of any connection there.
Yeah, we're in touch with DICOM. There's actually a lot of things being used in medical. So in medical, there's SMPTE 2110 being used, and it's even part of an initiative at DICOM called DICOM RTV that uses the media of SMPTE 2110-20, but adds medical ancillary and metadata information to the flows. But there's also, as you pointed out, high throughput J2K that's present. There's JPEG 2000 that's present. There's SDVOE that's present. So there's a mixture. There was a lot of SDI used in some applications of medical, but a hospital or a medical facility is a very, very good microcosm of other types of systems. There's a mixture of professional equipment, and extension and switching equipment that is not part of the main professional equipment rooms. And then there's enterprise class equipment. And the hospital is the perfect place to see the collision of different AV over IP technologies and the problems that that's entailing now. As people were previously bridging their SDI equipment to HDMI to load it into PACS communication systems and AV signal management to see something from the operating room in a different room, but that didn't have the same extreme low latency requirements as in the room with the endoscope type of problem. So this is all mixed together, but you're absolutely right. There is a link between 2110-20 and DICOM with DICOM RTV. And we are also talking with DICOM about, are there things in IPMX that are leverageable, maybe not solving a new problem than DICOM RTV is solving, but maybe as a bridge point to the other types of connections in the same medical facility.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
I just wanted to add a comment that I think we should be very careful about introducing IPMX into the Pro AV world too early because we're still sort of trying to get it accepted. If you think about a system where they're putting in, they've got 1,000 restaurants or 1,000, stores, the only way they're doing that is they divide their engineers into tiers. And you have fairly low-level engineers who don't know that much, putting at each of those 1,000 stores, putting in systems that have been tried, true, and they're told, you do this, this, and this, and then you have a working system, and now you're moving on to the next store. And so they have these different layers of engineers. And I can speak from experience from with Diversified because we're sort of like struggling with this to a certain extent. The Pro AV world is all about doing some fairly standard things and repeating them many, many times. While the broadcast world is much more, every system is a snowflake. And you really need engineers who can put those snowflakes together and make them work. And I'm sure at some point IPMX is going to get to the point where it is so very standardized and it can be just turned out. But I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah,
So
this is 100%.
Yeah.
This is really the perfect synopsis of ISC and Infocom, and your comments are dead on. This is absolutely accurate. The initial interest in IPMX comes from obvious places. We're talking to the highest levels of organizations where people are managing systems of systems, and they're trying to figure out how to architect something for the next half decade and 10 years. So it's true that if you speak to a person who's dispatched to implement huddle rooms or conference rooms or things like that, this is just way too big and too unfinished and too complicated for them. Hence the things that we've been talking about, creating profiles, creating out-of-the-box experiences, labeling systems, maps, testing, but the conversation is definitely ripe for the higher-ups that are thinking about how to build out their systems and how to deal with their supply chain problems, with their security issues, with their bridging of different asset classes, okay? People who are already confronting the limits of other things are really interested in talking about it right now. But it is, for a lot of implementers in the channel, something that needs a lot of work. There's no question.
I just want to add to that, just to take an opportunity to bounce off what you just said. So one of the things in AIMS that we're really focused on is education. So the goal is not to create like an education training thing within AIMS, but we've been asking the same questions. We think there's a real need out there for to start with just having a VIXA and CD accreditations, right, so that people can get trained on IPMX and just generally, right? But eventually it'd be great if you could go to a technical college and get a 1-year or 2-year degree in, Pro AV over IP systems installation. But what's stopping that from happening is a lack of curriculum. And so we have to really start from the basics. Right now, we've got a good collection of presentations. We can put them on YouTube. We could probably turn 1 or 2 of those into a DVIXA accreditation program if you pass a test or something. But we really have to have like the full suite of training, and I think eventually some kind of technical college level, program that we can make available out there. So, getting those partnerships with people that can make that happen, that's what we're working on right now. We totally agree with what you're saying, though.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree that education is important, and I think it's actually interesting that there is a lot more of these accreditations in the Pro AV market. For example, a lot of our engineers who primarily work in the Pro AV have got various CTS certifications. Mm-hmm. And yet you look at all the engineers in the broadcast space and there's no accreditations. And I think the reason is that in the Pro AV market, it was really needed to have certifications because the barrier for entry is fairly low. Like almost anyone can say, hey, I'm an AV installer because I can put in some speakers and a receiver and maybe a little Crestron thing. And the barrier to putting in a very large studio, broadcast studio, is so high that mom and pop stores aren't doing it. And so it's almost like you didn't need the accreditation because the barrier for entry was so high.
You need it, and also it's interesting, there's so many proprietary protocols and systems in Pro AV that the economics of it work really well because the manufacturers will develop their own training material, and then AVIXA is there to take the money and to make it all work. And so you can go get training now on all these proprietary protocols, but there's really nothing available. You can go look at the AVIXA catalog for training. You will not find PTP. You will not find multicast networking for basics. You can find those things, but they're all in the context of, Dante networking or, whatever you're working with. Yeah.
All right, great point. All right, anybody have a burning last thought, something we haven't said that they'd like to bring up here? No? All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists. Thank you very much.